Okay, hello. Hi, Risa. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm so excited that you're here. I've been looking forward to this
Mm.
time with you and you being a guest on our podcast. You've been such an important part of my professional experience that, it's so exciting to know that other folks are going to have access to your voice. So thank you in advance.
Thank you again for inviting me. I appreciate this.
I love it. Risa, before we get started, let me do a little bit of the kind of formal bio first, and then I'll go into asking you some questions. Our topic today is really on kind of organizational culture, right? And the specific topic is the investment in becoming a healthy organization and the practices associated with that. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about what those practices are and how it is that we make those investments and why they're so important. But before we do that, let's do a quick bio. So Risa Nelson is an accomplished diversity, equity, inclusivity, and accessibility DEIA professional with 2 decades of expertise in leading strategic, sustainable transformation in higher education. As the inaugural director for DEIA at Yale University Library and Collections since 2022, Nelson advances the vision for greater inclusivity and accessibility across the library's services, spaces, programs, and resources. She also works to connect and align DEIA efforts across the Division of Collections and Scholarly Communication, including the Institute for the Preservation of Cultural Heritage, Yale Center for British Art, Yale Peabody Museum, Yale University Art Gallery, Yale University Library, and the Yale University Press, with the campus-wide Belonging at Yale initiative. Nelson served as the Assistant Dean of Yale College and Director of the Afro-American Cultural Center at Yale from 2015 until 2022. And she's also held roles at Cornell University, Mercy College, Loyola University Chicago, the University of Notre Dame, St. John's University, and Columbia University. Whew! A proud graduate of Teachers College, Columbia University, and Northeastern University, she is dedicated her career to empowering students, staff, faculty, alumni, and community members in their learning journeys and in co-creating more equitable spaces on college campuses and far beyond. Oh my goodness. What haven't you already accomplished? That is absolutely amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
You
you.
go. All right, I'll
Say-
just start off there. Such an honor. All right, my friend. Let's dive in. I want to ask you, um, just you've been laying a foundation for your organization for a few years, right? And obviously you have a seasoned career path, you have a lot of experience. And in my work with you, I know that you've been incredibly intentional in your work. And so before even getting to like what actually you did, tell us a little bit about like from the starting point, what was your goal?
hmm And thank you for noting that. I've really tried to be as intentional as possible. And all along the way, I've let folks know, you know, DEIA is both the hoped for outcome, but also the process. And this can take some time, and we don't want to rush it. We didn't immediately get into, certain dynamics or situations or structures just overnight, right? This is in our case, decades, even centuries. So there's going to be a lot of, it takes a lot of time to really work through all of this, from understanding it to really developing a plan to move through culture change. So when I was appointed inaugural director, actually, for DEIA back in 2022, I immediately began a listening tour. I feel like that's kind of where all of this work really begins, the listening and the learning. So I tried to learn the needs, and I wanted to learn about the experiences of our staff members. So I did that for a period of months, actually several months, to again, learn about our culture and the vision for strengthening that culture and climate. And in that vein of listening to and empowering staff, I think over a decade ago now, our library staff members created a diversity and inclusion advisory committee, about a dozen people or so every year, which makes recommendations to the senior leadership on policies, practices, and such that bolster DEIA goals and values. And I began sponsoring this group, and their previous recommendation of a staff climate survey was revived and proposed back to our leadership group. And so that year, we began working on conducting an extensive and actually the first library staff climate survey. We rolled it out the next year, but that provided us with more data driven insights into some of our workplace challenges and I think opportunities. And so it wasn't just about collecting feedback just for the sake of having this information or just for the sake of uh, collecting and storing data, but it was about using that feedback. And I was very intentional and vocal about that from the very beginning, using that feedback to turn it into real actions that would improve staff engagement and empowerment, especially around inclusion and fairness, equity. And so there was, bits about promotion, career advancement for non-librarian staff, developing a culture of trust, respect, and recognition. So these kinds of things. The other thing that I focused on was operationalizing DEIA in leadership in our daily practice. And so we established different structures, including working groups. I mentioned already the diversity and inclusion advisory group, but we also had working groups related to the survey. So we had about 38 people involved in that, and we also started up an accessibility advisory group to ensure that DEIA isn't an afterthought, but a core part of our decision making and our strategic planning, and eventually assessment, evaluation, and reporting, because we're trying to make that a little bit more robust here as well. And so that was, I hope, an opportunity, and will continue to be an opportunity to move from more of a reactive approach to more proactive and just like an embedded strategy. We've also been trying to rebuild trust, as I mentioned, in leadership by increasing transparency in how decisions are made and communicating those decisions out more broadly and clearly and consistently, and by ensuring that staff at all levels, so our managerial and professional staff, our clerical and technical staff, and people who have been here for just a few months, and people who have been here for a few decades, we wanted to make sure that they also have meaningful input into shaping our programs, our initiatives, our policies. And then the other thing is instead of relying on the kind of ad hoc efforts, things as they pop up, we are developing more sustainable frameworks. And so whether that's the inclusive hiring training actually that you helped us with, or our goal development, which is a requirement of all staff members here, individual goals and then departmental goals. We want to make sure that, it's not just about compliance, but more about that cultural transition and transformation and sustainable transformation at that.
Well, and there were so many things that you touched on that the goal, right, was, transformation and sustainability, but you also talked about other things that are so important, like engagement and embeddedness and trust. And some of those things are more kind of nebulous to actually put your arms around, like to actually touch, right? The engagement or the trust. Everybody wants more trust. Everybody wants people to feel a sense of ownership and commitment. But the process, which is where you started, your description, is what allows for that to happen, right? And so a very intentional process that is not just about particular outputs, but about particular outcomes that allow for people to say, I was involved in that, I knew about it, I understood it, I had the opportunity to have a voice in it, I agreed with it, right? I helped to shape it. Those sorts of things are so important as far as like building the kind of trust, but also the kind of engagement that leads to commitment. Because then along the way, the sustainability is of course going to be connected to, are people in the organization, other than you with your particular title, seeing themselves as responsible for nurturing this, right? That's where the sustainability comes into place. And that's where I feel like you've done such a kind of a masterful job in thinking about like, what is it that we want? And part of what we want is a co-ownership, right? We want the broadest possible group of people to understand their role, their connection, and feel committed to this as part of their work.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's the co-ownership, the co-creation. It's, stakeholder engagement at, again, at all different levels, and that for me is a model of shared leadership because I always say, even if you don't have the title of senior leader or manager or whatever, I need you to be a part of this leadership as well, because these are the folks who I've worked with, partnered with, collaborated with in many different ways to create some of these initiatives that then impact, and policies that then impact uh, our colleagues directly. So, our funding initiative, for example, where we're able to provide funding for our staff members, again, at any level, kind of going above and beyond what they are already receiving, to support their conference attendance, their ongoing learning, webinars, professional development, just in general. And I think what I'll say is organizational culture is, I mean, it's extraordinarily complex. And it requires that intentionality, as you're suggesting, and it's built through uh, policies, but the interpersonal interactions that we're talking about, and the coalition building, and the leadership choices in those coalitions, and with the senior leaders. And I think even what we're kind of contending with is even the unspoken norms that shape how people engage with their work and their leadership, learning, service. We have to get at that as well. So there can't be one singular approach. It just won't be enough to shift the culture in those sustainable ways. So um, a couple of ways that we're trying to get at this is, I mentioned the ongoing learning and professional development area. So people obviously can't change what they don't understand or that they're not even aware of. So we've had, I mentioned the goals development workshop that you had facilitated back in, what was that, September? And then we did a culture change series, October, November, December. And we're working on an ongoing set of learning and development workshops that'll focus on microaggressions, identifying and interrupting them, and working through the bias and discrimination harassment reporting process. Looking at neurodiversity in the workplace and understanding the accommodations process. We're going to be looking at again, building psychological safety and trust. What that means. How do managers strive for that? How do they create these safe environments for their supervisees or their teams to do their best work? And so we want to get at that. And then also we're incorporating, so a couple of weeks after these sessions, which is kind of the learning community, we'll have community of practice sessions where people can really learn how to synthesize, integrate what they have learned, and apply it to their day-to-day life. And so, all to say, I think uh, people are more invested in the change when they themselves help shape it. And I hope that helps lead us to a sustainable transformation where, in a year when we do our next survey, we can kind of look back and say, okay, where are we stumbling? Where are we doing well? What do we need to tweak a little bit more? Where do we need more accountability, so that we can become a more effective and empowering place to work?
I love it. And I agree with you. Like the culture is one of those things that's this big, but it's so important and it touches everything. The way that I often describe culture is, if there's a diagram and strategy is here, right? Vision is up here. What do we aspire to? Strategy is here, right? What are those things that we are prioritizing because they align with and help us advance towards our vision? What is the structure that is in place that enables us to pursue that strategy, whether that's reporting lines, managerial effectiveness, internal communication, all of those things, right? Different groups like you're describing. And then along that same continuum is culture, right? And culture is kind of the norms and beliefs about how we are around here. And you know this, right? Culture, the most beautiful strategy in the world is not going to be pursued or is not going to be active or even understood if the culture doesn't align. And so it's this constant working up and down that continuum, right? Constantly thinking, and also as even the strategy needs to either be tweaked or clarified or brought into clearer focus because there are things that are happening in the external environment. That means that we're constantly realigning. And the place a lot of times that we do the realignment, we might test at the cultural level. We might ask, how's it feel, like the climate survey? But the way that we actually make change is at the structural level, the way that we actually impact culture. So how we communicate, what are the learning and development resources that people have? What are the tools and best practices? What are the behavioral expectations? And then those things, when those are tweaked, enable the strategy, but they also then should be reflected in the culture. But that exciting work is nonstop. And that's why, a role like yours is always, always, always so busy, because it's not just you set it and forget it, or it's not just you dip a toe in the culture and that's it.
Right.
There's this constant alignment that's happening because things are changing at all three of those levels all the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think another piece that I would add to it is, yes, culture is certainly shifting in places like these where we are just a itty bitty part of this grand uh community here, right? And so at the library, at Yale Library, and the division, the collections, we that has its own set of ways learned, communicated pattern behaviors over years. That also exists in university culture. That also exists in New Haven culture. So it is something that is, ever shifting. We have to kind of turn it around and say, okay, is this working? And sometimes that actually is a day by day thing. And not everyone is comfortable with that. Not everyone is comfortable with measurement, or let's be real, accountability. um if you're not based in an institution or department, organization, office, whatever, that does not have a culture, a well-established culture of accountability and assessment, evaluation, reporting, communications in general, how do you underscore the importance of measurement? How do you quantify then culture and cultural changes? Like, how do we actually see that shift? How do we track it? And so, there's what we did with the survey was both qualitative and quantitative. And so the other thing is, I think people are used to having one set of, there's a vision, there's a value statement, there are goals. We may need to tweak those, even especially in certain political environments. We may need to be tweaking those, how we talk about these issues and our needs. And not everyone is comfortable with that level of sometimes flexibility, but also just that shifting. We have competing priorities. People, between all of the meetings and emails alone, that is its own thing. We have different, budget constraints, enrollment numbers to look at, different policies that are affecting enrollment and demographics. And sometimes I think this work of cultural change, and especially DEIA, can be seen as extra work and extra labor, especially emotional labor, that not everybody has the time for, instead of seeing it as this is essential to our overall success, and our long-term success, and again, sustainability. And so, it is that that constant kind of pulse checking, and okay, where are we now? How does this feel to you? And I also think that in these kinds of spaces, which it can be very heady, and to help people, what I've been trying to do is help people tap into that heart level work. I always say that this work is hard work. We know this, but it is also heart work. It requires you to step into this a little bit differently, and oftentimes look at yourself and what you have learned, what you need to unlearn, and how you're moving through the world. Uh, and that can be a little tough for folks.
Well, I love the way you're describing this. When I think about accountability, for example, right? And I know that word, for some people, it just kind of sends shivers in their spine. But it's accountability for me. The thing that gets in the way of accountability a lot of times is that we're measuring at the wrong end. And I've even talked about this when I've been, on campus, and we've talked about goal setting with managers there. We're measuring at the wrong end. That's why it's difficult. We're measuring after the fact, right? After something didn't happen. that we wish would have happened. And instead, let's get in front of it. Let's talk about what will it look like when it's happening well? What is
Mhm.
our aspiration, right? The same way that we practice, playing a specific piece of music on the piano. We know what it sounds like when it's done beautifully, and then we practice towards that goal, right? Or a specific athletic, drill or something. We know what it looks like when it's happening well. And that's the same thing with so many things associated with our work and our workplace cultures is we should talk about like, what does it look like when it's happening well? So then we can then have an understanding of like what the bar is. And then we give ourselves a runway to be able to practice. Like just with all great performances, it's not here's what the bar is, and therefore you will be proficient tomorrow. But instead, okay, this year we're going to practice in this way. We're going to give ourselves some feedback loops. We're going to talk. And that's the path, that intentional path that I feel like you've been taking that allows for people to maybe bring down the level of fear and anxiety because they understand that there's a learning curve, and also that the learning curve is connected to back to that little, visual invisible model, back to
Mhm.
that vision. Like what is it that we're trying to achieve rather than what are we trying to avoid or potentially be punished for? And that's a very different feeling.
It is. It's a different feeling, and I think it requires sometimes different tactics where um, shifting to kind of a strength based model to say what are we doing well? What do we need to continue? What are the goals? If this, like you said, if this works out, if we accomplish X, Y, and Z, what will that look like? What will it feel like? What will the overall impact be in a number of different ways? And you define those metrics. And I think, and what I've been trying to share with our staff members here, is it's kind of a cycle, right? You need to develop this shared vision of what this can be. Like, let's co-create the environment that we thrive in, that we love to be in, right? And that we feel like we do our best work in. And then kind of go from there. Okay, so then what are the values? What upholds us? What is the North Star? What are our goals with that? And knowing all along the way, we need to have a little grace with ourselves too, because as you mentioned, some of this is new for folks. It's a learning curve for folks. And so, especially for those of us who are recovering perfectionists, how do we toss that out, right? And say, like, okay, I got it wrong today, my bad, and to take accountability for it and own, like, this is when I did this. This is the impact. Even if I didn't intend it, this is the impact. And this is what I will do to shift that. And to do better next time, and hopefully to give yourself some compassion and some grace when you get it wrong, but also hold managers and leaders especially accountable too. And so, after time and time again, if we're having the same conversation, okay, now what is really happening here? And to be able to hopefully you have enough trust and rapport to be able to dive into that conversation. Okay, this has happened 3 times, 4 times, we've talked about it. What's really going on here? Where are we getting hung up with this one issue? um and and uh and I hope that more and more leaders are open to that, and are do welcome the challenge, and become more adept at working through those challenges with their co-leaders, managers, teams, etc., in a more, like I said earlier, shared leadership model. Hmm.
That's one of the things that I wanted to kind of circle into this conversation is that one of the things that's happened at Yale is that there has been a beautiful kind of involvement, investment of leaders, like people in formal kind of titular leadership roles at many different steps, right? So the goal setting session that was really particularly aimed at managers, your very senior leaders were there kind of sitting at the table workshopping, right? And so the modeling and the presence, the inclusive managers toolkit, right? That all of your senior leaders went through this experience, this learning and development experience that was really about like, how is it that we philosophically want to make sure that we're aligned about our leadership philosophy and what that looks like in practice. And then also that we're making sure that we're bringing our managers into that process. So we can't just send our managers through a learning and development experience and then expect it to stick at the organizational level if the senior leaders aren't saying, oh yeah, we know what that is and we're co-signing that, or we're actually going to model it, or we're going to call it out and appreciate with appreciation when it happens, because we've also decided that that's something that works well for us. So the fact
Yeah.
that there's been so much leadership presence and buy-in and engagement, coupled with the engagement of people across the organization, right? And so it's like finding ways to make sure that people who are individual contributors, or people who may not have already had a kind of a visible role in some way or another in the organization, but have potential and have voice and have value and have contributions, that top down and kind of bottom up intentional approach that you've been cultivating is also one that definitely, deserves a call out.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that. And I think when let me see, in January, late January, we gave an overview of the DEIA, library-wide DEIA action plan. And I had representatives of the working groups that I had mentioned co-presenting this with me. They were co-authors of this. They presented me with recommendations, and I used those to develop this library-wide action plan. And it was a total shift for their colleagues, and you could see the chat was on fire, right? They loved it, to be able to like cheer their colleagues on. Like, this came directly from us, right? It came from not just top down, like you said, bottom up, left, right. It was about the people. And that is, for me, the most important thing. At the core of all of this is like the processes, super important. The place, important, yes. People, the power is in the people, and that is, the people are and will always be our greatest asset. And so we have to invest in that and empower their voices to be fully present, even if sometimes what they're saying may be a little a little difficult to hear. So I do think that it kind of shifts that. And just going back to inclusive managers, the toolkit training, the goal development workshop that you did. But I also want to call out Culture Road, because the to be able to have leaders, managers, folks all around, along the spectrum, to be able to develop a shared language that they can use to talk about these issues, to talk about their views, their experiences, and ultimately their vision and their steps for, and hopefully the accountability towards the steps for cultural change, is really, really important. And like the office hours that you all do, for people just to like check in and say, okay, this is what I'm experiencing. Am I off base with this in my understanding of it? Or, can you help me understand this a little bit better, or what have you? I mean, it is, after speaking with the different staff who are involved, like it's really just another great resource for them to tap into. Especially when I might not be available because I'm in a meeting and there's only one of me.
Yeah. And here we are. Well, and
Yeah.
that's it, right? That we need a community, and that all of us, especially in organizations, right? And this because you have been one of the, founding members of Culture Road, or you and Yale, but it's because when a couple of people have an experience, it's fantastic. But when we all have it, it's cultural. You know what I mean? Like, if we
Yep.
can all be in the same space, kind of experiencing things that allow us to have a learning experience, a conversation, a reflection, ask for help, right? So we have people sometimes will just chat us and say, hey, can we get on a Zoom call, like a one-on-one Zoom call, to just work through something? Sure. We hop right on, right? Just to know that there's like an ecosystem of people who we trust, who are familiar, who are there with our best interest at heart. That's cultural. And that's what we really want to happen, with Culture Road, and that every single person feels like they are part of culture, right? That they have an ability to have their voice and their impact. Because otherwise, people, especially when things shift in the environment, right? People just kind of sit back and say, well, we're waiting for leadership to give us guidance,
Yeah.
or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And to instead shift that dynamic so that all of us see ourselves as having a shared ownership role in culture. That's the power, right? The way we describe it is our workforce, right? That there is an
Mhm.
actual
I love it.
beautiful force when we come together, and it's not just about kind of memorizing a value statement. It's about living and breathing who we are together.
Yeah. And I think these kinds of communities, platforms, resources, um reignite that force, right? Especially in uncertain times, tough times, whether we're talking politics or whether we're just talking about culture change in general. To be able to go into a space, online or in person, and get fed by, nourished by others, and then also to pour into other people as well, so we kind of reignite the flame and the passion and the love for doing this work, because it can be tiring. And we do have to remind ourselves to take a break, rest, hydrate, take care of ourselves, right? I have to do this like every day, remind myself. And I'm grateful for the other people reminding me to do this as well. Because that's a community of care. Yes, it's a community of learning, a community of practice. It's a community of care. And for me, that is what is going to drive the cultural change.
Beautiful. Let me just ask you, just as we kind of wind down, right? What are you, here we are, it's, early 2025. There are so many things happening that are kind of shifting in the United States, in higher education. What do you have your sights set on in the next, thinking of kind of goal and thinking about aspirations in the next year or 2 year? What are some of the things that you're hoping for, imagining, and trying to move forward?
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna keep on keeping on. And like we were sharing earlier, this work will always remain, DEIA, belonging, however we want to call it, whatever acronym, this is the same work when it was first formalized in higher education in the 60s, early 60s, right? And so, regardless of the name, regardless of the title or how we're describing it, it will continue on. The work will always be necessary, and it's always going to shift because humans shift and evolve all the time, and so we have to respond to that. So, I mean, more locally, we'll be doing the another climate survey, like I mentioned, just to see where we are. Kind of a pulse check on where we are, where we need to go, what we need to tweak, where we might need to pull back on, where we need to infuse more resources and support into. Um, and I think just really building from there and getting more and more people involved in this work. I think over the past year, we've had let me see, all in all, I think it's been around 100 people who have been involved in one way or another with, regardless of their title, because I'm the only one at the university, at the library with this title, one of very few across the library university with this title. But we're just gonna keep on with that and build out from there. So out of we have about 575 staff members, to have in one year about 100 folks really in it, doing this work, serving on committees, infusing these ideas and this energy into their research, their presentation, scholarship, some teaching. It's a beautiful thing, and so hopefully we can just continue to grow it from there.
Love it. Love it. Love it. It's so good. There's so much good energy. There's so much beautiful, generous, visionary leadership. And yeah, we're gonna keep on keeping on right here with you. Like every step of the way, right? We'll all be kind of part of the same beautiful ecosystem, trying to figure out how to, create the beautiful world that we want to live in, right? And that we want for our students, for ourselves, for our children. Thank you so much, Risa, for this conversation. I feel energized and really hopeful from it.
Thank you for inviting me.